They tried to arrest Seth Rollins after Raw went off the air, and not a single person in that locker room did anything about it. Not management. Not his allies. Not one veteran who's known Seth for years stepped up. The man who saved the Visionary from being hauled out of that arena in handcuffs was Obafemi, and before he did that, he had to go through Brock Lesnar to get there. Let that reality crash over you like a tidal wave. Brock Lesnar, a man with no active contract and no legitimate reason to be breathing the same air as anyone in that building, put his hands on Seth Rollins the moment those cameras cut, and the entire WWE infrastructure failed. Smash that like button right now and subscribe, because what unfolded in that corridor after Raw is the most explosive backstage story of 2026, and I am breaking every single layer of it down for you tonight. Here is what you need to understand before we get into the details. Raw ended at a boiling point. The broadcast itself was already a powder keg, tensions running hot, egos colliding, unfinished business sitting heavy in the air. Seth Rollins had been through the fire during that show. Whatever happened on screen drained him, and anyone who has followed Seth's career knows that when he gives everything inside that ring, he walks out of it with nothing left in the tank. He was running on fumes when he headed toward that exit. He was not prepared for what came next. Nobody was. Brock Lesnar had been lurking. That word, lurking, is deliberate, because that is exactly what witnesses are describing. The beast was not passing through. He was not there by accident. Lesnar positioned himself near the talent exit, the private corridor that only top-level roster members and their immediate teams use after a show. This was surveillance. This was patience. This was a predator waiting for the exact moment his prey had no armor left. And when Seth Rollins came around that corner, Brock Lesnar was already in motion. The attack was immediate and vicious. No words. No warning. Lesnar drove Seth into the wall of that corridor with the full weight of a man who spent decades sculpting himself into the most physically dangerous performer in the history of this business. Seth hit that wall hard. Personnel who were present say the sound alone stopped everyone in their tracks. And then, nothing. Paralysis. Because when Brock Lesnar is unleashed in a confined space, your body makes a decision for you. Every instinct screams at you to stay back, to stay out of it, to survive. Somebody called the police. And that decision, that moment where this situation escalated beyond WWE's internal ability to contain it, tells you everything about how severe this was. Law enforcement responding to a backstage WWE incident is not a creative decision. That is real. That is the kind of detail that makes your stomach drop because it means what happened in that corridor was not just dramatic, it was dangerous. Name the last time police were legitimately called in connection with a WWE backstage incident, on screen or off, and tell me who was involved. Let's see who in the Suplex Rumble community has the deepest knowledge of WWE history. Seth was down. Security was overwhelmed. Officers were on the way. And Brock Lesnar, emboldened, unchecked, and apparently untouchable, was not finished. This was the moment where the entire trajectory of Raw's backstage power structure was about to be permanently altered. Because the footsteps that echoed down that corridor next did not belong to law enforcement. They did not belong to a WWE official. They belonged to someone who has been quietly watching the veterans of this business walk around like they own everything, and decided tonight was the night to remind them that ownership has to be earned. Obafemi arrived like a verdict. No hesitation. No scanning the room for allies. No calculation about whether inserting himself into a Brock Lesnar situation was a wise career move. Obafemi looked at what was happening to Seth Rollins and made a choice that most grown men with far more experience would never have the courage to make. He stepped directly into Brock Lesnar's space and he refused to move. The two men locked eyes, and for a moment that everyone present says felt like time stopped completely. Nobody breathed. Brock broke first, not with retreat, with aggression, because that is the only language the beast has ever spoken. Lesnar came at Femi with everything, the kind of explosive violence that has ended careers and shattered legacies for over 20 years in this business. And Obafemi did not go down. He absorbed it. He absorbed it, and then he gave it all back at double the voltage. The first counter staggered Lesnar. The second one put him down. Brock Lesnar, the Conqueror, the 1 in 21, the man who ended The Undertaker's undefeated streak at WrestleMania, was on the floor of a backstage corridor, leveled by a 26-year-old who just decided enough was enough. The police walked into a scene that had already been resolved. Brock Lesnar was removed. Seth Rollins was on his feet, refusing medical attention, standing upright through what had to be extraordinary pain, and Obafemi was right beside him. Not celebrating, not posturing, just standing there, present, immovable, like he had always belonged in that space. That image needs to live in your memory permanently because it is the visual representation of a power shift that WWE cannot walk back from. This is not a one-time moment. This is the second time Obafemi has stood across from Brock Lesnar and walked away the last man standing. You know what they say in this business, once is a surprise, twice is a statement. If WWE pulls the trigger on Obafemi vs. Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania with Seth Rollins as the special guest enforcer, does Seth cost Femi the match out of pride, or does he put his ego aside and let Oba finish what he started? I want every opinion in that comment section. Now let's talk about Seth Rollins, because this storyline does not belong entirely to Femi and Lesnar. Seth is the fulcrum. Seth is the reason any of this happened. And Seth Rollins is one of the most psychologically complex characters in WWE today, which means the way he processes being saved is just as important as the saving itself. This is a man who rebuilt himself from the ground up after career-threatening injuries. A man who rejected every label, every ceiling, every limitation that this industry tried to place on him. The visionary does not get rescued. The visionary is the rescue. So what happens inside Seth Rollins' mind when he has to reckon with the fact that Obafemi, younger, newer, not yet tested at the main event level, was the one who kept him out of handcuffs tonight? Does gratitude take root? Or does that pride, that fierce, burning, uncompromising pride that has defined every chapter of Seth's career, twist the gratitude into something darker? Into resentment? Into competition? Because if Seth Rollins starts seeing Obafemi as a threat to his own legacy rather than an ally in his corner, this story becomes something entirely different. It becomes one of the richest character studies WWE has produced in years. The veteran who can't accept that the next generation doesn't need his permission to rise. The emerging star who doesn't want the veteran's blessing, only his respect. That tension, if WWE has the creative vision to develop it properly, is WrestleMania main event territory. And Brock Lesnar, what are the consequences? Real consequences. Because law enforcement was involved. Because what happened in that corridor was not a scripted segment with a referee counting falls. This was assault in a private area of a public venue and multiple witnesses watched it happen. If WWE allows Brock Lesnar to return to programming without addressing the legal and institutional weight of what he did tonight, they are sending a message to every person on that roster that power and intimidation will always trump accountability. That is a message WWE cannot afford to send right now. Brock has operated in this company for over 2 decades as an exception to every rule. He arrives on his terms. He leaves on his terms. He destroys on his terms. But Obafemi just demonstrated, twice now, that Brock's terms are not universal. That the physical dominance Lesnar has used as currency his entire career can be matched, can be exceeded, can be shut down completely by someone who simply refuses to be afraid of the reputation. The beast has been defanged. Not permanently. Brock Lesnar never stays down forever, and anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't understand what makes him one of the all-time greats. But tonight, in that corridor, something cracked in the armor that Brock Lesnar has worn since the day he walked into WWE. And the man who cracked it is just getting started. Obafemi is not a prospect anymore. He is not a future star being carefully developed for a moment that's still 2 years away. He is the moment. Right now. Tonight. In a parking lot with police sirens in the background and Seth Rollins bleeding against a wall. That is where Obafemi chose to announce himself to the world, not under the bright lights of a WrestleMania stage, but in the raw, unscripted chaos of what happens when the show is over and the real hierarchy gets tested.